Hello and welcome to Castle Rama-sama, formerly known as Castle Morn. This is the prize I claimed in the last chapter. Last time you could see Ren Rama-sama, the great hunter from Kamura, wander around in the lands between, fighting an Outrider Knight from Dark Souls 3, a Nazgul from Lord of the Rings, and the Leonine Misbegotten who tried to take over Castle Morn. And all the while you could listen to my essay about if Elden Ring is actually Dark Souls 4 or not. But this is in the past now. Just like Irina at the end of her side quest, because she is dead.
Irina, how could this be? My daughter deserved better. The fault lies with me. I chose duty over my daughter's safety. And that is how fate has answered.
Nobody could have seen that coming. I mean, her father Edgar actively decided against protecting her from all the monsters nearby and rather tried to retrieve a dumb stupid sword. Who would have thought that this decision would lead to Irina's death? Well, that was a good taste on how side quests work in From Software games. But that was just the first one, there will be more in the future. So about side quests, you know, that's a story for another day. Last time I talked about past games and compared Elden Ring with the Souls series. Today I will embrace the new. And to live by that spirit I changed my build a bit, as you can see. At least with the limited possibilities that I have, because so far I haven't found a way to level up. Meaning my so-called new build just consists of a new weapon and another armor set. To be precise, I am now using the Morning Star, which looks like a fine weapon. Having strike damage and bloodlust build-up seems like a good combination, and the moveset is simple but effective. As for armor, I put on the scale armor, which I bought from the merchant nearby. It's a significant upgrade, but to keep my equip load on medium I had to put on leather trousers and the braces from my starting equipment. No helmet right now, but I think in terms of fashion, this is the right call anyway. All in all, it looks quite different compared to the light gloves Ren Rama-sama was wearing so far. He is used to upgrade his gear on a regular basis, so the new look makes sense. And with that done, let's get this chapter started by traveling back to the beginning of the game and following the guidance of Grace. On towards all the new stuff. The first new aspect that Ren Rama-sama encounters in this episode is an enemy design. Because after all the adventures from chapter 1 I felt rather confident, and so I challenged the Golden Knight that I avoided before. I wanted to see how difficult he truly is, and as a side note, on my way here a soldier dropped this cool shield which has a 100% physical damage negotiation. That's exactly what I wanted, and that boosted my confidence even further. That's why we start this chapter off with another fight against a foe on horseback. As you might have noticed during the duel against the Nazgul, I mean Night Cavalry, I'm not a fan of this design, simply because the fights are slow paced. This is also true for the tree Sentinel, who is also riding around a lot. Most enemies on foot present you clear openings after heavy attacks, which grants you a short time frame to attack them safely. But most of the time it is really short and you are punished if you are too greedy, because the enemy might immediately start a new attack string. That creates a lot of tension and a lot of tempo. There is a frantic back and forth between offense and defense, and even if a fight takes a long time, it doesn't feel like it, because you can rarely catch a break. However, the Tree Sentinel and the Nazgul have a really long recovery time between attacks, and they are often riding away during that, especially the Nazgul. Ren Rama-sama can't match the speed of a horse, and so I have to make sure I can squeeze in a little bit of damage before the knight rides towards the horizon and back. So once again, there's a lot of waiting. And waiting is just not fun. At least these enemies seem to be the exception so far. This is the third one of them, while enemies on foot appear everywhere. If the ratio stays like this, it is okay, because then the riding enemies offer some variation and a different approach to a fight. It is still not that much fun, but I can view it as its own sort of challenge, and if they are not used in abundance, I'm willing to let it slide. But I have to say, this one is much better than the Nazgul, just for the fact that it has a second phase with new attacks alone. It's a bit absurd because he uses his shield for them. I mean, imagine you have a big chunky halberd and you use it for regular enemies, but if you get serious, then you attack with the shield. Seems counterintuitive, but as you can see, his shield attacks are actually mainly performed by the horse, which jumps and dashes around. Speaking of his horse, there is definitely something interesting going on. In this fight there is only one health bar for the rider, no separate one for the mount. And even when I'm clearly only hitting the horse, it reduces the health of the Sentinel himself. That's weird, because it was different for the other riding enemies. Against the Nazgul I set out to kill the horse first, that was my whole strategy, which didn't work out in the end, but it was a possibility. In this fight I can't even try that, because there is no way to just damage the mount. I think that's intentional. That this is a detail that should tell me something about this enemy. And my theory is that the rider and the horse are actually one and the same being. In terms of game design, this is certainly true, because there is nothing separating them. The Nazgul even had his own moveset and animations when he was on foot. I'm not expecting anything like this here, but let's put that aside and rather focus on the lore. I don't know much about this tree sentinel, but just by looking at it, it becomes clear that he must be special. His whole equipment looks really heavy and extremely valuable. He is much better equipped than any other enemy I've seen so far, but his bulky armor completely covers him. I cannot see what's underneath it. The only organic parts I see are the legs of the horse. So I can't really tell if there's actually a human inside this big armor. It looks human from the outside, but for all I know it could be anything. For example, a robot like these stone snakes I met last time. But if I take the health bar into account, it could be something that is connected to the horse. Something like a centaur. That's far-fetched, of course, but I have a theory that seems much more likely. Because I noticed that the shield, the one thing he uses when he gets serious, has these tendrils all around it. That's probably not a fashion choice and it doesn't make the shield any stronger, but it could be the final puzzle piece in this riddle. Here is my theory. The tree sentinel is actually a tree. So the name does not imply what the sentinel is guarding, but rather what he is. Inside of his armor there is a mixture of tendrils, roots and other wooden structures, and the armor covers them, so the tree sentinel can travel these lands looking like a human. He is connected to the horse. Maybe he is some kind of parasite that is now growing out of the horse, or maybe this whole organism was born like this. Hard to tell. That is certainly a wild theory, but considering how important trees are in these lands, it would make sense. Especially if you consider the gigantic earth tree in the background that most likely has some mythical powers. Maybe these golden knights are his sentinels that guard the land that is above its roots. Well, that's my theory for now. And all of this started with the simple detail that the horse has no own health bar. Maybe I'm reading too much into it. That's for you to judge. Even if you disagree or know the correct answer, I hope that my theory crafting at least made the last minutes more entertaining. And after my long-winded speech, we just made it to the middle of the second attempt. So it's time to speed things up. I passed the test of endurance. That took a lot of patience and concentration. But I got the big chunky halberd as reward, which is worthless at the moment, like all cool weapons that I find, because I still don't know how to level up. But even if this thing requires a lot of faith, I haven't decided on a build yet. Maybe I will invest in faith later on, but at the beginning I will focus more on my physical attributes. Anyway, I earned my right to move on, and so I arrived at the church ruins that the Guidance of Grace was pointing at. And it immediately became apparent that the game wants you to arrive here as soon as possible. There are two noteworthy things in this church, and one is this merchant that looks like Santa Claus. His name is Kale, and he has some lore-related things to say, but more importantly, he has cool stuff to sell. There's a lot of basic, useful equipment like a telescope or a torch. But most noteworthy is the crafting kit, which unlocks the item crafting menu item, which has been teasing me since the beginning of the game. So I just bought a new feature to play around with. I'm not a big fan of crafting systems in general, but especially in an open world game they add some value. You can collect ingredients everywhere on the map, and the crafting kit grants them a purpose by letting you combine them into consumable items. In Elden Ring it is pretty basic, because there is no experimentation involved. In a lot of games with item crafting you can freely mix materials together and find new combinations by yourself. Here you have to find recipes first. In the crafting menu you don't choose your materials, but rather the end result, and the menu shows you what you need to produce it. Without a recipe you cannot even start to craft, but Kale conveniently also sells you some cookbooks as well. This basic implementation of a crafting system lacks any form of player-driven exploration to find out what else you can craft. But that's not to say that it is worse. In my opinion, both systems have their own merits and weaknesses, and here in Elden Ring they can carefully design when you get new recipes and how. They can be rewards for quests, or can be placed in late game dungeons if they don't want you to get it early. With this approach, new cookbooks are basically like any other item that you find in Elden Ring, and their value is determined by the playstyle of the player, just like with new weapons. Regarding the crafting materials, I'm not looking forward of managing a huge inventory with lots of different materials, and I'm even less looking forward to farming specific ingredients for the things I want to craft. For me that would distract from the main experience and could become frustrating quickly, unless I find the materials in abundance. We have to see how this turns out, but all in all the crafting fits the style of the game. And there is one clever design decision that I can appreciate immediately. Next to the crafting kit, Kale also sells cracked pots, which can be used to craft throwable consumables like fire pots. They are quite strong, at least at this stage of the game, but you can only craft a limited amount of them. At the moment I have 3 cracked pots, so I can only craft so much. Once I used one I can refill them, which means that I don't lose the cracked pot. So I can only bring a limited amount of fire pots into a fight. There's no way to farm 50 of those and then exclusively throw pots. At the moment my limit is 3. I will most likely be able to increase that number, and this creates a nice form of progression. I assume that I will be able to fill the pots with all kind of stuff, for example poison. So I'm pretty sure these pots will be useful during most of the game. If you ask me, that's a great addition to the crafting system. Oh, and one more thing. Next to Kale there's also a smithing table, which means that I can upgrade my weapons now. So from now on, Ren Rama-sama is wielding a Morningstar +1. So all in all, a really valuable place. And not that far away I stumbled upon the next new thing, this creepy looking statue which pointed me towards this direction, and lo and behold, there's an entrance to a dungeon. The Stormfoot Catacombs, which made me curious because my goal is called Stormvale Castle, which is atop of these cliffs. Are these catacombs connected to the castle? Is this a stealthy way to get to my goal? Spoilers, it's not. It's actually its own little thing, a dungeon with only one entrance, which is also the only exit. Or in other words, it is a level, just like Castle Morn in the first chapter. Speaking of Castle Morn, I was rather harsh with this place. I reviewed it like I would do it with an area in Dark Souls or Bloodborne, and that's why I found a lot of things to nitpick. These catacombs right here show me that I was being unfair, because compared to this, Castle Morn felt like the dungeon of the year. My point of reference was wrong. Instead of comparing the catacombs to a proper level, I should have instead drawn parallels to the Chalice dungeons from Bloodborne. Those are mostly procedurally generated, and while some of them have interesting level design, most of them feel like they were churned out by a mass-producing machine. Because that's what they basically are, mass-produced levels that get boring fast. There's not much interesting happening in them, only the increasing difficulty gives them some value. On my first playthrough of Bloodborne, I played a lot of Chalice dungeons, and while I appreciated that you can find lore snippets and unique bosses on the main path, even then I feel like most of my time in there was wasted. Bloodborne is an almost perfect game, but this is one of its biggest flaws. As a connoisseur of good level design, I felt underwhelmed, and that's only natural because in the end the Chalice dungeons are not designed levels, but products of a mass-producing level generator. And that's how these catacombs feel to me. I don't know if they are procedurally generated, but they certainly feel like it. And I bet that there are a couple of dungeons all over Elden Ring that feel exactly like this one. Dungeons that use the same design, the same flamethrower pillars, the same enemies, and the same structure. With structure I don't mean that they have exactly the same layout, but rather that you have to search for a lever that opens the door to the boss. This is the first dungeon like this, so maybe I'm wrong. And if I am, I will apologize in a later episode. It's just, everything in this dungeon feels so generic, so low quality, that this is the most plausible explanation for me. If they have like 50 to 100 dungeons like this, then they basically have no choice. They have to mass produce dungeons, and using the same design and structure is the most cost efficient way for that. But if I'm right, then why have that many dungeons in the first place? Is that really the best way to go? Wouldn't it be more engaging to halve the number, but to put in some more effort and time to make the dungeons more unique? Okay, I'll stop my critique here because it is based on assumptions. I might be wrong and dungeons might be more different than I imagine right now. I just see how generic this one is, and that gives me a bad feeling. I wanted to express that. And with that we are done with my negativity for this chapter. From here on out everything about this play session was great, and we start off with the payoff of this dungeon, the boss. If you ask me, this boss, the Erdtree Burial Watchdog, has a great visual design and is exceptionally well animated. Everything about it is creepy. The way it walks, how it holds the sword, or how it flies. Its wind-up animations are hard to react to because they are so stiff, and I would describe them as robotic. I know, I'm using that term a lot, but after the stone snakes, the burial watchdog also gives me that mechanical feeling. And now that I think about it, the same is true for the stone imps that were the normal enemies in these catacombs. There's definitely something... Oh, look at the damage of the fire pot. Beautiful. I wanted to say, there's something going on with weird ancient technology. I think it's fascinating. I mean, this thing right here is basically some sort of flying flamethrower tank. And the name suggests that it is protecting the Erdtree, which was also true for the tree Sentinel. I can't put the pieces together yet, but because of the weird design and the creative attacks, I'm enjoying this fight a lot. And I think I'm well equipped for it. My Morningstar with its strike damage seems to be a good choice. Although I have to say that this boss is not that hard anyway. I wish it was. Maybe just increase the health a bit, because it is over already. Nevertheless, a good boss fight. I can leave these catacombs with a positive feeling now. You see this place here? From this angle it is partly covered by the hill. I'm not doing a good job with the camera here, because I didn't know that this scene would be so crucial. You can catch another glimpse right here. This is the place, the good one. A lot of good things happened here. This is where the game was hiding most of its new features, and because there was so much going on here, I have to jump around in the footage a little, otherwise I won't have enough time to talk about them all. This place is some sort of army encampment with a lot of Godric's soldiers. You can identify them by the colors of their coats. I find a couple of weapons here, which is always nice. At the end, when I cleared out the camp, I found this chest underground and it contained a small, unassuming knife. But don't be fooled, because it is the key for a new feature. Until now I found a couple of Ashes of War, which are like weapon arts, and they are sitting in my inventory. I was not sure what to do with them. This Whetstone Knife, as it is called, is the answer, because it allows you to change the weapon art of a weapon. For example, my Morningstar has the kick as its technique, its Ash of War. But if I don't like it, I can alter that with the Whetstone Knife. I could change it to the Wild Strikes, the one the Battle Axe used, assuming I have found the appropriate Ash of War. Also, the ash is not consumed in the process, instead I can equip it to another weapon when I stop using the Morningstar. In summary, I can now customize the weapon arts, which is really cool. There are some limits, of course. Not every weapon class can get all the Ashes of War. If one is clearly designed for a dagger, you can't expect that you can put it onto a great hammer. And there are also some weapons that cannot change their Ashes of War at all. For example, the Bloodhound's Fang, the cool sword I got from the Outrider Knight, has a unique Ash of War that mirrors some of the crazy movement that foe did. I assume it is the only weapon with that specific Ash of War, so if you want to use it you don't have any other option. Which is fine, because it makes these weapons more unique and is probably a balancing measure as well. For every normal weapon, the Whetstone Knife opens up a new option for customization, so you can try out new techniques without the need to change your weapon or upgrade other ones. At the same time, that also lowers the commitment to your build, because back in Dark Souls 3 you had to make long-term plans if you wanted to use a weapon with a specific weapon art effectively. You had to invest in specific stats and upgrade the weapon itself. However, all these things are still true here in Elden Ring. You still have to put some thought into your build and have to choose the weapons you want to upgrade. You just have the option to try out more of the Ashes of War. If you ask me, that's a good design decision. It hits the sweet spot of increasing the player's freedom while maintaining the focus on the long-term decisions. It's really nice, and it was just the first new feature I found here. The second one is mostly a visual thing though, but a really nice one. In the middle of the camp there is this glowing pillar thingy which has an item underneath it, and as you can see it is presented as a really important one. Looking at the map now, you can see that it is filled out in a stylized and good looking way. If you compare that to the grey outlines I was using before that, that's a significant step up. It not only looks much better, but provides a lot more context, so I can easily recognize the areas I have been to. If you look carefully, there are also some points of interest there. The map kinda teases what else you can find in the area. And it does all this without littering the map with a lot of icons and quest markers. There are some, especially the Sites of Grace, but those serve a purpose because they are also your fast travel station. If I ignore these, then the map feels in-universe, like the map that Ren Rama-sama is actually looking at right now. And with this design, it encourages exploration instead of giving you so much information that you don't need to explore anymore and only go to the places you want to. In addition, finding the map pieces themselves is a valuable goal as well. I'm pleased with that. However, this doesn't answer my question from Chapter 1 if Elden Ring actually needs a map and if it could be more engaging without one. I'm just saying that the way how they implemented the map is good. But if a map, and especially the fast travel, is necessary, that's a story for another day. When I finally dealt with all the enemies and picked up all the items, the new day had already arrived. All in all, clearing out this camp felt like in most other open world games. Even though the fighting itself is similar to Souls-like games, The general approach is the same as in titles like Breath of the Wild or Ghost of Tsushima. I could circle around and scout out the camp from a distance, then I could choose different angles to approach it. After killing some enemies, I could temporarily leave the area to choose another angle of attack. Rinse and repeat until I carefully defeated all enemies. There was a lot of stealth involved, and as I pointed out during my conclusion of Chapter 1, this is a totally different gameplay experience than in a Dark Souls area where I have less options to approach encounters. This camp right here is a good example of that. But now that this is done, I can finally take some rest at the site of grace. And then this happened.
Greetings, traveller from beyond the fog. I am Melina.
Oh, so it's not Pokey. But what does she mean with traveller from beyond the fog?
I offer you an accord. Have you heard of the Finger Maidens? They serve the Two Fingers, offering guidance and aid to the tarnished. But you, I am afraid, are maidenless.
Yeah, you're not the first one to tell me.
I can play the role of maiden, turning runes into strength.
Aha!
To aid you in your search for the Elden Ring.
Why does everyone assume I'm after this ring?
You need only take me with you to the foot of the Erd Tree.
So this is how you level up. Of course I accept. This weird challenge run I'm doing against my will has to
Then
end.
it's settled. Summon me by grace to turn runes into strength.
So she has the typical design of the Firekeepers, but gameplay-wise she is Bonfire-chan from Dark Souls 1, meaning I can level up at Sites of Grace.
Shall I turn your runes to strength? Let my hand rest upon you. For but a moment, share them with me. Your thoughts, your ambitions, the principles you would follow.
Seek lest, if you know what I mean. And here it is, the level up screen I was longing for. I already know exactly what I want to invest in because I want to switch to the Claimer for now. However, there is more to talk about here. First of all, the ability to level up is connected to this maiden, and when Varé called me maidenless before, he was referring to my inability to become more powerful. What he said makes much more sense now. It's always nice when a gameplay feature like leveling up is connected to the story in some way. And Melina here not only grants me this service, but she also gave me the condition to bring her to the foot of the Erd Tree. I assume there is more to it, and she might have her own fleshed out character arc. Combine that with her entrance by teleporting next to me, and the fact that she seems to know a lot about the world and my role in it. All of this makes her an intriguing character. I'm interested to see where this will lead to. Another more important thing, at least for me, is the timing of her appearance. During my PlayStation I was so confused why she visited me here, at this random place. I could easily not have come here. According to the map there is another way to the castle. So what if I did? Would I not be able to level up for the whole game until I finally sat down at this specific site of grace? It didn't make any sense, so I allowed myself, just this once, to look it up. Let me stress that this is an exception because I want to keep this playthrough as untainted from information outside of the game as possible. But in this certain case, I just needed to know. I typed in how to meet Melina in Elden Ring and looked only at the top results. It is linked in the description if you want to see for yourself, and according to that source, Melina appears when you sit down at the site of grace after you have activated 3 of them. This is obviously false. Because as you could see in chapter 1, I activated way more than that until now. There's a story here about false or incomplete information on the internet and how there is so much noise and content that you can't find the information that you actually seek. But let's stay in the game. I didn't look at another website, so I don't know the truth for sure, but I can do something with this information. Having Melina appear after you activated a certain number of Sites of Grace sounds way more logical than to only have her appear at this specific one. If I combine that with my experience, then I can make some sense out of it. It is probably true that she appears after your third Site of Grace, but only the ones in Limgrave count. Because if I subtract all the sites I found on the Weeping Peninsula and the ones that are in a dungeon underground, then the count really is 3. Which means that my stroll towards the Weeping Peninsula at the beginning is not intended, and I used such a weird route that I didn't find enough Sites of Grace before leaving Limgrave. Maybe I was just unlucky, but on the other hand, I can't deny that I enjoyed my run so far. The increased difficulty based on my inability to level up was nice. However, I'm really glad it's over now. Especially because I can finally use the Claymore. As you can see, I immediately made some changes to my character. Because the Claymore is so heavy, I also had to go back to my starting armor set. I should put some points in endurance next. That's for the future, but right now I want to travel back in time because there is still another feature that was introduced here.
Another matter. I bequeath to you this ring.
The Elden Ring? No.
Use it to traverse great distances. It will summon a Spectral Steed named Torrent.
And that's exactly what it does. It summons Torrent. He's not like Epona, Agro or other famous gaming horses. When you call for them, they come running from off-screen. Torrent on the other hand just appears and also disappears when I get off him. He really is a Spectral Steed, whatever that is. At least not a normal horse, his horns are another proof of that. So what exactly is he and how does this summoning work? That's probably all related to Melina herself. At some point I want answers to these questions. For now I'm happy to have something new to play around with. Riding on Torrent is almost like an own game mode. Your movement changes completely. For one, you can travel much faster obviously. That makes traversing the lands between much more enjoyable, at least as long as you are going straight. Turning around with Torrent can feel awkward at times, but that's okay, that's how riding a horse feels like. Later on I also discovered that Torrent has a double jump. How he does that is another mystery, yet it is a cool addition to his moveset. His double jumps open up new possibilities and you can reach places that were inaccessible before. Double jumps are always fun. This one is especially useful because you can change your direction when inputting the second jump, meaning you can use that to save yourself when accidentally jumping off a cliff. Which can happen easily when you're not used to Torrent's speed yet. This speed is also useful when fighting on horseback. That's a viable option. You have these attack animations on Torrent which are slower compared to your attacks on foot. You cannot use a shield either and that should make you more vulnerable, but on the other hand you gain the increased mobility to run around quickly or to double jump to safety. Basically you can adapt the fighting style of the Erdtree Sentinel and the Nazgul. You are able to approach the enemy quickly, get in a couple of attacks and ride away before they can retaliate. Classic hit and run tactics. This playstyle needs some getting used to, but it works pretty well against a lot of enemies. It is like a second combat mode that you can try out when you don't succeed with fighting on foot. Come to think of it, I guess you are supposed to use Torrent in fights against riding enemies. They were tedious on foot, mostly because I had to wait for openings. If you imagine that I had this mobility during the Erdtree Sentinel fight from earlier, then I could have been more active. I could have catched up when it was retreating or tried to intercept it during its approach. These enemies make a lot more sense now. I need to test that out in the next encounter. Torrent is a really cool addition, and after all these wonderful gifts, these features that I got, I kind of forgot that I wanted to follow the guidance of Grace. I was so focused on testing out all the new stuff that I headed south, And there I found even more interesting things. First of all, there was this looking glass, which was even shown on the map. It doesn't make any sense, because how is this working? I am so far up, I can even see myself with it. Okay, who is talking to me right now?
Oi! You there! Could you help us out, Cully?
This scene right here is kinda funny. As you can see, I was totally confused because there is someone calling out, but the way he phrases it, it is borderline mockery.
Stop pretending you can't see me.
I was running around for quite a while trying to find the source of the voice and getting more and more confused in the process.
Why won't anyone look me in the eye? I'm not that ugly, am I?
Many minutes later I stumbled upon the solution, but frankly it was more an accident.
What'd you go and do that for?
That's some comedy gold right here. This fellow's name is Bok, and he has a new quest for me.
I was pushed out of the cave, told not to come back, not ever. Then I ended up as a tree. When they threw me out of the cave, they took everything I owned. I'm frightened of them, so I have to gather myself. My knees start knocking, just thinking about that god-awful cave on the shore.
This doesn't sound as interesting as the story with Castle Morn. Nevertheless, Ren Rama-sama was on board. This poor fellow needs some help. He might look like a goblin, but he doesn't behave like a monster, so my path will now lead me west towards the shore. I had a short pit stop at the Church of Elleh, where Kale the merchant resides, and wouldn't you know it, I was greeted with yet another NPC and another new feature.
A pleasure to meet thee, Tarnished. I am the witch Renna. I was entrusted this for thee by Torrent's former master.
Her appearance and the way she talks embeds her in this aura of mystery. I mean, look at her faces, plural. Just like Melina, she seems to know a lot, and she's probably quite important for the story. Right now I don't know how to assess her, and the same is true for the features she introduces.
'Tis a bell for calling forth spirits. Summon them with it. From ash and return to the Erdtree. The spirits will obey thine command but briefly, as they recall battles past. Now it is thine, to do with as thou wishest.
At this point I had to admit that it was too much new stuff. I just got a whole bunch of new things to play around with, so I didn't thoroughly test out the spirit summons. This will be a topic in a later episode. But the sheer amount of features that was introduced in such a short time is remarkable. The game really wants you to follow the guidance of Grace to introduce all these things as soon as possible, and if you stray from the beaten path, then you pay the price. Meanwhile, I continued my search for the cave that Bok was talking about, and met another of these merchants. At this point I realized that these people seem to be their own faction. Their similar looks serve a gameplay purpose by clearly communicating that this is a merchant, but there certainly is some lore behind them. There must be a reason why all the merchants look so similar. Maybe they have some kind of purpose, a hidden agenda. And maybe at some point one of them will behave differently. Someone might even imitate their demeanor to trick me. All these guys become enemies. I'm just speculating, but I'm looking forward to what the game will do with them. This one sold a short bow, so I could finally retire the stupid crossbow. Since it is also way lighter, I could re-equip the scale armor, so I'm already back to my former look. And with that I entered the cave. At the sight of Grace, Bok appeared to confirm that this is the correct cave. He was beaten up by the inhabitants, which gives me all the more reason to slay the monsters here. There is not much to say about the cave itself. It taught me that I can't ride Torrent everywhere. He is not allowed in dungeons. This cave is rather short, with a couple of goblin enemies, and the darkness is used here quite well. Without a torch or another light source, it is really risky to go in here. But thanks to Bok, I knew that there were enemies here, so I was careful and arrived at the big cavity in the center of the cave. There were some goblins patrolling here, but this was all part of the setup, because this place is a trap. If you consider how early this is in the game and that you can get here right after entering Limgrave, it is quite a shock to have 2 boss health bars appear. And then these monstrous things dash at you. It's easy to lose your cool here. Each of these guys is not that tough on their own, but 2 at once is quite challenging. Their attacks also build up bloodlust, so you need to be careful. What makes this fight cheap is the fact that there are even more goblins in the cave that can join in on the fight. I can appreciate the surprise. I was not expecting a boss after I saw all the smaller enemies roaming around. But this can get chaotic quickly, and if you die here it might feel unfair. In general, the Soulspawn combat system is more suited to one-on-one fights, so filling a boss room with a lot of adds is not a good decision most of the time. If you add the dark corners to the equation, and the sometimes wonky camera when it collides with one of the rocks, then you have a recipe for frustration. Luckily for me, the one-handed moveset of the Claimer is quite good for crowd control, and the high damage numbers help as well. The fire pot also proves its usefulness once more. It's still a confusing fight. After my victory, I went back to Bog and gave him his stuff. And that unlocked another feature, although this one is relatively small. I can now alter armor. This seems to make small adjustments to the weights and armor ratings of a piece, but it mostly affects the visual design. There is not much to talk about here, just another option for customization, and that's good.
My sewing needle.
The boss fight unlocked another thing, the passage to this small island. There are a couple of items here, but most importantly is this church in the center of it. Just look. Interacting with the altar grants me 2 choices. Dragon Communion sounds interesting, but not for Ren Rama-sama. At least for now. With more information he might come to another conclusion, but just the name doesn't sound like something that suits a monster hunter. So I ignored whatever it is that happens here, but this place reminded me of the dragon that ambushed me in chapter 1. And now, with all my new tools, with Torrent and the Claymore, why not just try a round or 2 with this monster? Ren Rama-sama is far away from home and doesn't remember how he came to these strange lands between. He doesn't even know if this is reality. He might be in the afterlife, or in a dream. But he remembers who he is. And after all, a hunter is a hunter, even in a dream. So I returned to central Limgrave and set out to kill the Rathian that is terrorizing the lake. That leaves us with a fitting final battle to wrap this chapter up. During this play session, Elden Ring really developed its own identity. The crafting, all the little customizations, like with the Ashes of War or with the sewing kit, and especially Torrent, they all push this game away from its predecessors. And it is Torrent I want to focus on once again, because in this fight the mobility on horseback really shines. Being able to quickly disengage when the dragon goes into his startup animations is already very useful. In addition, you can also follow him quickly when he goes into the air, or use the double jump for some crazy dodge maneuvers. With Torrent's velocity you can even dodge the fire breath, however that needs some getting used to. Thanks to a well-placed stake of Marika, I start the next attempt quickly, and this time I also try out the Ghost Wolves, because why not? They fit the Monster Hunter theme. In Monster Hunter Rise you could choose a dog as your companion, although that didn't help me much in this attempt. In this case it wasn't the wolf's fault, but I'm not sure if they are a good choice here. With all the fire flying around they can die quickly, and they have a much harder time keeping up with the dragon. On the other hand, on Torrent I have no other option to spend my magic points, so I might just as well summon the wolves again. I skipped over the 3rd attempt here because it was over fast. In round 4 I wanna point out that Torrent has his own health pool, just like the horses of riding enemies. He can take damage like everybody else, and it seems he gets healed when I drink a healing flask. From time to time I have the feeling that Torrent soaks up damage as well. When the hitbox of an enemy attack touches him first, then sometimes I don't receive damage, even if the attack touches me as well. I might be wrong, maybe my hurtbox is just drastically reduced when riding, but I did notice a couple of hits that only did damage to Torrent. When his health is depleted, he vanishes. I am able to resummon him, however. That uses up one of my healing flasks, which is a no-brainer in this fight. Torrent is too useful here. The Nazgul from the last chapter was also able to resummon his horse, so it was probably a Spectral Steed as well. That solves the mystery. So the Night Cavalry summons Spectral Steeds, and the Earth-tree Sentinel is a tree. I think that's enough progress in the lore for today. The wolves just got cooked. I feel sorry for them, there is not much they can do here. Coming up, there's another example of Torrent soaking damage. The dragon performs a tail swipe, which clearly connects. Ren Rama-sama even grunts. But only Torrent's health is reduced, which feels weird in this scenario. I don't know what the conditions are for Torrent to soak up the damage, but this right here should have hurt me as well. This attempt is looking great so far. I still have lots of healing flasks and the dragon is getting really low. A couple more good swings and this fight is over. However... well, it is over, just as I said. So on to the next. I have to admit that at this point I have basically addressed everything I wanted to talk about today. To give a little summary of this chapter, I am enjoying the new features that were introduced here. Elden Ring now has a lot of stuff going on that you cannot find in other From Software games. Some are only small touches, others their own systems, for example the riding or the crafting. The whole package is fun and so far I'm having a good time with Elden Ring. Although there are some aspects that I'm not sold on yet. Today I put my focus on my early impression, which is overwhelmingly positive. But looking forward from here, there is one thing that leaves me worried for the future of this playthrough. There is a flaw in this game, and in the next chapter I will talk about that. We shall see if it is just a minor thing, or if it will be a bigger problem from here on out. There was your little teaser for next time. Apart from that, there will be more adventures in Limgrave, and I might even return to the Path of Grace and find a way to Stormvale Castle. Maybe. For now we have to see how long this fight keeps going. It is definitely possible at this stage, I have proven that with the previous attempts, but some attacks of the dragon are quite punishing and can quickly kill a good run. Let's see if it happens again. The dragon must be so annoyed with these 4 little maggots wailing on him. The monster has been hunted. Man, that felt a bit like a fight from Monster Hunter. The dragon had so much health and I was beating on it for so long. But now it's done and Ren Rama-sama has restored his faith in his own abilities. Now he can bravely and proudly move on to the next chapter. Until then, what? What is your problem? Where do you even come from? This whole place was on fire. Were you just hiding and waiting for your chance? Why did you have to ruin my moment here? You're just a dragonfly, not a real dragon, you stupid son of a...